Deep in the cold, forgotten corners of space, a massive alien salvage yard floated in darkness. This was not an ordinary junkyard. It was a graveyard of abandoned ships, lost technology, and creatures no one wanted. Among the broken metal and shattered remains of past battles, something moved. A small, weak breath, a trembling shift of pale, scaly skin. The creature had been here for a long time. It was small, barely the size of a dog. Its scales, once pure white, were now covered in rough, barnacle-like growths. Its wings were weak, almost useless. Its eyes, silver and glowing faintly, barely opened. It was alone, forgotten. Until now. Darren Rhodes was a human mechanic, and a desperate one at that. He had been flying across the galaxy, looking for valuable scrap to sell. The salvage yard was a dangerous place, but it was full of old warships and alien tech that could make him rich. His ship, Rust Bucket, was small and fast. He carefully maneuvered through the wreckage, scanning for anything useful. His scanner beeped. A life sign. Darren frowned. That was strange. Nothing was supposed to be alive here. Curious, he adjusted his ship's lights, shining them through the floating debris. And that's when he saw it. A small pale creature curled up inside the twisted remains of a battle cruiser. It barely moved, its breathing slow and shallow. Its tiny body was covered in thick, hard barnacles, making it look almost like a piece of junk. Darren's heart clenched. It was just a baby. He hesitated. He was here for scrap, not for saving strange creatures. But something about the hatchling felt wrong, like it had been abandoned on purpose. He sighed. "All right, little guy, let's get you out of here." Pulling on his gloves, he climbed out of his ship, carefully making his way to the wreckage. He reached the hatchling and gently touched its side. The barnacles shifted. Darren jerked his hand back. They moved, as if they were alive. But nothing else happened. The dragon didn't react. It was too weak. He carefully picked it up. It was cold, almost lifeless. Then, a deep mechanical beep echoed through his helmet. His ship's alarm. Someone else was here. Darren looked up and saw several dark figures moving through the wreckage. Scavengers, pirates, maybe even slavers. And they were heading straight for him. He had seconds to decide. Taking a deep breath, he tightened his grip on the small dragon and sprinted back toward his ship. The second his boots hit the floor of the Rust Bucket, he yelled, "Take off." Now. The engines roared to life. Darren strapped himself in, the baby dragon still in his arms. Blaster fire exploded outside as the scavengers realized what was happening. Darren hit the thrusters. The ship lurched forward, escaping just as enemy fire streaked past the hull. He didn't know what he had just found. He didn't know why the scavengers wanted it. But one thing was clear. He wasn't supposed to take it. And that meant it was worth something. As the Rust Bucket sped away into the darkness of space, the baby dragon let out a tiny, weak sigh. Its silver eyes flickered open, just for a moment. And in that moment, Darren knew. This was only the beginning. Darren piloted the Rust Bucket through the cold emptiness of space, his mind racing. He glanced down at the small albino dragon resting on the co-pilot's seat. It hadn't moved much since he rescued it. Its pale scales were rough, covered in strange, barnacle-like growths. "What the hell did I just bring on board?" he muttered. The ship's AI, Cass, beeped in response. Unknown life form. Weak vitals detected. High presence of foreign biological matter. Darren sighed. He wasn't a doctor, just a mechanic, but the creature wouldn't survive without help. He opened his toolkit, pulling out a scanner. Carefully, he ran it over the dragon's body. The results made his stomach twist. The barnacles weren't just attached to the creature. They were feeding on it, a parasite, and it was spreading. Darren cursed. "You're one unlucky little guy." The dragon whimpered softly, as if it understood. Darren leaned back, thinking. He had a few medical supplies, but nothing that could remove whatever this was. He needed a real expert. His mind raced through his contacts. There was only one person crazy enough to help him, Dr. Lorne, a rogue cynobiologist, banned from several star systems for her experimental research. She was the best in the field, if you didn't mind the fact that she didn't care about laws. Darren punched in the coordinates. "I hope you're still alive, Vea," he muttered, setting course. The journey took hours. The dragon remained weak, barely moving. But something strange started happening. The barnacles pulsed. Darren stared in horror as tiny black tendrils shifted beneath them, writhing like they had a mind of their own. "Oh, that's not normal," he muttered. The dragon suddenly whimpered, curling in on itself. It was in pain. Darren gritted his teeth. He couldn't wait for Vea. He grabbed his plasma cutter. "All right, little guy. This might hurt." He carefully brought the tool close to one of the barnacles. Heat radiated from the blade. The second it touched the growth, the barnacle shrieked. Darren nearly dropped his tool. That wasn't a normal reaction. That was alive. The dragon spasmed, eyes flying open in pain. Darren clenched his jaw and kept cutting. The barnacle twitched violently, then burst, releasing a cloud of dark spores. The ship's alarms blared. "War in Ing. Unknown biological contaminant DTTTE." Darren swore and grabbed his emergency containment spray, sealing the area. The spores dissipated, but the damage was done. The dragon shivered, its breathing ragged. Darren's heart pounded. Had he made it worse? Then, suddenly, the creature's body relaxed. The spot where the barnacle had been. Clear, smooth scales. Darren exhaled. So the barnacles could be removed. But at what cost? As he prepared to remove another, the ship's proximity alarm blared. Darren's stomach dropped. A ship was following them. And it wasn't friendly. Darren's hands flew over the ship's controls as alarms blared. The rust bucket wasn't built for combat. It was an old mechanic's vessel, fast, but not armed. Cass chimed in, her voice calm despite the chaos. "Incoming vessel detected. Class: Corsair. Signature: unknown. They are scanning us." Darren cursed under his breath. Corsair-class ships meant trouble. Pirates, bounty hunters, or worse, black market collectors. He turned to the albino dragon. It was still weak, breathing heavily, but its golden eyes flickered open. "Looks like someone wants you back, little guy," Darren muttered. The ship's comm crackled. A deep, synthetic voice spoke. "Unidentified vessel, power down and prepare to be boarded." Darren scoffed. "Yeah, not happening." He yanked the control stick, sending the rust bucket into a steep dive. The engines roared as the ship shot downward, barely dodging a warning blast from the Corsair. Cass beeped urgently. Hull integrity at 92%. Shields at 60%. Darren clenched his jaw. They weren't trying to destroy him. If they wanted him dead, they would have blown the ship apart already. They wanted the dragon. Another shot grazed the ship's side, making the whole cabin shudder. Darren swore. He had to shake them off. Fast. He hit the comms. "Listen, buddy, I don't know who you are, but I'm not in the mood to hand over my cargo." The voice on the other end chuckled. "That's not your cargo, human. That creature belongs to the Empire. Stand down, and we won't kill you." Darren's grip tightened. Empire. That explained everything. The albino dragon. It wasn't just some abandoned creature. It was valuable. Important. And the Empire wanted it back. Darren didn't trust the Empire. He'd seen what they did to rare species. Experiments, cruel testing, and worse. His gut told him that handing over the hatchling meant certain death for the little creature. The dragon let out a weak, pitiful sound. Darren made his decision. "Cass, prepare the EMP pulse." The AI hesitated. "Warning. EMP will disable our own systems for 30 seconds. Darren flicked a switch, locking in the command. Better than letting these bastards win. The Corsair locked onto them. A missile warning flashed red. Darren exhaled, firing EMP in 3, 2, 1. A wave of blue energy exploded from the rust bucket, frying every electronic system in the area. The Corsair's lights flickered and died. Their weapons and thrusters cut off instantly. Darren's ship also went dark. For 30 agonizing seconds, everything was silent. Then, with a slow whine, power surged back into the rust bucket. "Go, go, go," Darren yelled, slamming the thrusters. The ship lurched forward, escaping before the Corsair could recover. They were safe, for now. Darren exhaled and turned back to the dragon. "We need answers," he muttered. The creature blinked at him, its golden eyes filled with something Darren hadn't noticed before. Intelligence, as if it understood everything that had just happened. And for the first time, Darren wondered, who, no, what exactly had he just rescued? Darren's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the ship's controls. The rust bucket was flying at full speed, escaping the Corsair that had tried to board them. The baby albino dragon lay curled up in a corner, still weak but awake. Its golden eyes were watching him. Something about that gaze unsettled him. It wasn't just an animal. It was thinking, understanding. "Cass," Darren said, his voice low. "Scan the hatchling." The AI beeped in response. "Running genetic analysis. Processing." The ship's systems hummed as it worked. Darren drummed his fingers against the console. He had a bad feeling about this. Finally, Cass spoke again. "Results detected. Species, Draconis albinos. Status, endangered. Genetic markers suggest heavy bioengineering. High probability of artificial modification." Darren's eyes narrowed. "Bioengineering? You mean it's not natural?" "Affirmative," Cass replied. "This creature is not a simple dragon. It has genetic enhancements, designed for unknown purposes." Darren turned to the baby dragon. It blinked at him. Suddenly, the pieces started falling into place. The Empire had abandoned it, but why? They had sent a hunter after him, after the dragon. They wanted it back, which meant it was dangerous. Darren exhaled. He glanced at the dragon, who was still covered in barnacles and space grime. It looked so weak, so helpless. But if the Empire had abandoned it, something didn't add up. What were they afraid of? The baby dragon let out a small chirp. Darren sighed and knelt beside it. Carefully, he reached out and peeled off a barnacle from its soft scales. The dragon flinched but didn't pull away. "Guess you're stuck with me, little guy," Darren muttered. The ship shook. Warning alarms blared. "Cass, what now?" Darren snapped. The AI's voice was urgent. "Multiple ships inbound. Scanners detect an Empire warship." Darren's stomach dropped. An entire warship for one baby dragon. Something was very, very wrong. He turned to the creature. "What the hell are you?" The dragon met his eyes. And then, for the first time, it spoke. A single word, soft but clear. "Run." Darren's heart pounded. He didn't need to be told twice. Darren's heart nearly stopped. The baby dragon had spoken. Its voice was small, almost musical, but clear as day. Just one word. "Run." Darren didn't hesitate. He slammed his hand onto the ship's controls, forcing the rust bucket into full-speed evasive maneuvers. The thrusters roared, the ship's hull rattled, and the stars outside blurred as they shot forward. "Cass, what's our situation?" Darren barked. The AI's voice was sharp. "Enemy warship closing in. Energy readings suggest high-powered plasma cannons. We cannot withstand a direct hit." Darren cursed under his breath. An entire warship just for one tiny dragon. It didn't make sense, unless this little creature was more important than he thought. He stole a glance at the hatchling. It was crouched near the co-pilot's seat, its golden eyes wide with something Darren could only describe as fear. "What do they want from you?" Darren muttered. The baby dragon trembled but didn't answer. Another alarm blared. Enemy ship has locked onto us, Cass warned. Incoming tractor beam. Darren's pulse spiked. A tractor beam meant they weren't trying to destroy him. They wanted to capture him. Or rather, they wanted to capture the dragon. Darren's mind raced. He had two choices. Try to outrun a warship, which was suicide. Fight back, which was also suicide. But at least he'd go down swinging. Darren gritted his teeth. Option 2 it is. Cass, reroute all power to forward shields and weapons, he ordered. Warning. Our offensive capabilities are limited, Cass reminded him. No kidding, Darren muttered. Just do it. The Rust Bucket's autocannons rotated, aiming at the massive warship that loomed behind them. Its sleek, black hull was covered in glowing blue markings, Empire insignias. Darren knew how this worked. They didn't negotiate. They'd kill him the moment they got what they wanted. Not today. Darren spun the ship hard, dodging the first blast of plasma fire. A second shot grazed the shields, making the whole ship shake violently. Shields at 62%, Cass reported. Darren growled. They weren't going to last long. He glanced at the baby dragon. It was still trembling, its tiny claws gripping the seat, but its golden eyes were locked on the warship outside. Then something changed. The dragon's trembling stopped. It blinked, and suddenly, the golden glow in its eyes intensified. Darren felt the air in the cockpit shift. A strange energy pulsed through the ship. His skin tingled. Cass. What's happening? The AI hesitated. Unidentified energy surge detected. Origin. The hatchling. Darren's stomach tightened. Oh, hell. The baby dragon opened its mouth. A low hum filled the ship. Outside, the Empire warship halted. For a brief second, everything was silent. Then, boom. A shockwave blasted out from the baby dragon's tiny body, tearing through the cockpit like an invisible storm. The ship's lights flickered. The air crackled with static. Darren turned toward the warship, just in time to see it explode. A fireball erupted in space, tearing the warship apart. Debris scattered in all directions. Darren's jaw dropped. His ship hadn't fired a single shot. It was the dragon. The little creature slumped over, breathing hard, its body steaming. The golden glow in its eyes faded. Darren was speechless. Cass broke the silence. Analysis complete. Darren exhaled. All right, let's hear it. Cass's voice was unnervingly calm. The hatchling is not merely an animal. Its biology suggests it was engineered as a living weapon, capable of generating energy surges that can disable or destroy enemy ships. Darren slowly turned to the dragon. It looked up at him with innocent eyes. A living weapon. No wonder the Empire wanted it back. Darren swallowed hard. He had just gone from a simple mechanic to the caretaker of the galaxy's most dangerous secret. And now, the whole Empire would be hunting them. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Kid, you just made my life a whole lot more complicated. The baby dragon gave a soft chirp and nudged his arm. Darren couldn't help but chuckle. Yeah, I guess we're in this together now. But deep inside, he knew. This was only the beginning. Darren barely had time to catch his breath. The wreckage of the Empire warship was still drifting through space, burning from the baby dragon's attack. But Darren knew this wasn't over. The Empire wouldn't ignore this. They had sent one warship after the dragon. Now, they would send more. Cass, scan for enemy signals, Darren ordered, his voice tight. Scanning. Multiple hyperspace signatures detected. Estimated arrival. 3 minutes. Darren's grip tightened on the controls. 3 minutes. That wasn't much time. He turned to the baby dragon. It was still slumped in the co-pilot's seat, its tiny chest rising and falling rapidly. That last energy blast had drained it. We need to move, Darren muttered. He slammed the Rust Bucket's thrusters to full power sending the ship into a wild sprint through the void. Behind them, the stars shimmered, hyperspace portals opening. The Empire had arrived. 3 massive warships emerged, their sleek black hulls gleaming under the distant stars. Darren's stomach twisted. Each of those ships could flatten a city. And they were coming straight for him. The cockpit shook as a warning blared. Hostile ships locking weapons. Darren cursed. He yanked the controls, twisting the rust bucket into an unpredictable spiral. Plasma blasts screamed past them, missing by inches. He needed a plan. Fast. His ship wasn't built for combat, and the baby dragon was too weak to use its powers again. Running was the only option. Cass, find me a jump point. Now. Calculating. There is a wormhole nearby. Coordinates locked. Warning. It is unstable. Darren grimaced. Unstable meant dangerous. But staying here, that meant certain death. Set course, he commanded. The rust bucket's engines flared as the ship rocketed toward the wormhole. Behind them, the warships closed in. Darren could hear their comms crackling. Unidentified vessel, power down and surrender the creature. Darren smirked. Not happening. The wormhole loomed ahead, a swirling blue vortex, pulsing with unstable energy. It could tear his ship apart. But Darren wasn't about to let the Empire win. One shot. That's all he had. He dived in. The moment the rust bucket crossed the threshold, everything went wrong. The ship lurched violently, alarms screaming in protest. Darren felt like he was being ripped in half. The wormhole twisted and churned, trying to spit them out. Structural integrity at 48%, Cass warned. Darren gritted his teeth. Hold together, girl. Just a little longer. Then, an explosion. One of the Empire warships fired into the wormhole, its blast detonating just behind the rust bucket. The shockwave sent the ship spinning wildly. Darren fought for control. The ship jerked and twisted, nearly tearing apart. Then, suddenly, silence. The shaking stopped. The alarms quieted. Darren blinked, his vision still spinning. They had made it through. He checked the sensors. No warships, no signals. They were alone. A single shaky breath escaped his lips. We made it, he muttered. A soft chirp made him look down. The baby dragon was awake, its golden eyes glowing faintly. It stared at him, as if understanding what had just happened. Darren exhaled. He reached out and gently ruffled the small creature's head. Looks like you and I are stuck together, kid. The dragon let out a tiny purr. Darren chuckled, but deep inside, he knew one thing for sure. The Empire wouldn't stop hunting them. And next time, they wouldn't just send warships. They would send something far worse. Darren had no illusions. The Empire wouldn't give up. They weren't just after the baby dragon anymore. They were after him too. A human had defied their authority, had fought back, had won. And that was something they couldn't allow. Darren checked the rust bucket systems. Bad news everywhere. The ship was barely holding together. Shields at 12%. Fuel running low. The wormhole jump had scrambled half the nav system. But the worst part, the Empire's warships had followed them. Their hyperspace signatures blinked onto the scanner, just behind him. Darren clenched his jaw. No more running. If he ran again, they'd just keep coming. He had to finish this. The baby dragon stirred beside him. Its golden eyes flickered open, still weak but recovering. Darren reached out and touched its head. All right, kid, he murmured. Time to end this. The dragon let out a small growl, a sound of agreement. The Empire's warships loomed closer, forming a blockade. A voice crackled over the comms. Final warning, human. Surrender the creature. Darren smirked. Or what? You'll blow up my ship. Correct. He rolled his eyes. These guys had no imagination. He looked at the baby dragon. Think you got one more blast in you. The little creature chirped. Darren grinned. Good enough. The first warship fired. A massive plasma beam cut through space, aiming straight for the rust bucket. Darren slammed the controls. Evasive maneuvers. The ship twisted and spun, dodging by inches. But Darren wasn't just dodging. He was getting closer. Cass, full power to engines. The rust bucket barreled toward the enemy fleet, shaking from the strain. The baby dragon stood up, eyes glowing. Then, boom. A shockwave erupted from the tiny creature. It wasn't just fire this time. It was something bigger, something ancient. A wave of pure energy rippled out, slamming into the warships. Their shields collapsed instantly. Metal twisted, circuits fried. The Empire's mightiest ships were suddenly helpless. Darren watched as explosions tore through the fleet. He had won. Silence filled the cockpit. The baby dragon slumped, exhausted but alive. Darren let out a breath. That was insane. He checked the scanners. The Empire's ships were gone. The battle was over. For now. Darren leaned back in his chair, staring at the stars. "You know, kid," he murmured, "I think we just made some enemies for life." The baby dragon chirped, curling up beside him. Darren sighed. He had no idea what came next. But one thing was certain. This wasn't the end.